In the bustling heart of his own restaurant, a self-made millionaire walked past her every single day for 5 years. He never once looked into the eyes of the quiet woman washing dishes in the corner. But 20 years ago, he had stared into those same eyes and promised her forever, before she vanished without a trace. His name was Daniel Reed, hers was Elena Flores, and for one perfect summer in 2003, they were inseparable. Then, just before autumn, Elena vanished. Daniel built a life, a fortune, and a renowned restaurant, all while believing the love of his youth was gone forever. He never imagined she was just feet away, hidden in plain sight for half a decade. This is the true story of how the past can haunt the present, and how the most profound truths are often buried in the last place we think to look. They met in the coastal town of Carmel, California, where the Pacific mist hangs in the air like forgotten dreams. Daniel was 22, a line cook with calloused hands and a head full of recipes. Elena was 19, an art student who painted seascapes and believed in soulmates. He worked at a tourist trap called the Wharfside Grill. She waited tables 3 nights a week to pay for her supplies. Their first conversation was about the proper way to chiffonade basil. Their last 2 months later was a promise made under a blanket of stars on Point Lobos. He told her he was leaving for San Francisco to train under a famous chef. He said it was just for a year, maybe 2. He swore he would come back for her, that they would open a place together. She believed him. She gave him a small painting of the cove where they first kissed. He left the next morning. Elena waited. She wrote letters to the address he gave her, a shared apartment in the Mission District. The first few came back marked "Return to Sender." The phone number he'd scribbled on a napkin was disconnected. By the time winter fog settled over Carmel, the awful truth had calcified in her heart. She had been a summer fling, a beautiful memory he had conveniently outgrown. The shame was paralyzing. She dropped out of school, unable to face the pity in her classmates' eyes. A month later, a different discovery made her retreat complete. She was pregnant. With no family to speak of and a minimum wage job, the future telescoped into a narrow, desperate tunnel. The vibrant artist vanished. In her place was a survivalist. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Daniel's ascent was brutal and total. The famous chef was a tyrant, but Daniel absorbed every technique, every insult. He worked 18-hour days, slept on a friend's couch, and thought of Elena only in the exhausted, silent moments before sleep. The memory was a sweet ache he couldn't afford to indulge. Ambition became his anesthetic. Within 5 years, he was a rising star. Within 10, he had investors, a concept, and a location for his own restaurant, Reed & Co., a farm-to-table destination in the heart of the city. The night before the opening, he found the small painting of Carmel Cove, packed away in a box of old books. He felt a sharp pang, a ghost of that summer's feeling. He hung the painting in his private office, a tiny monument to a simpler self, and walked onto the expo line the next day a different man. Reed & Co. was an instant success. Critics raved about Daniel's visionary takes on coastal cuisine. He earned a Michelin star within 24 months. He was profiled in magazines, celebrated as a self-made maestro. The boy from nowhere had built an empire on discipline and sacrifice. He dated sporadically, a food critic, an interior designer, but the relationships were transactions of status, not of the heart. He had convinced himself that the furnace of his kitchen was the only love he needed. Back in Carmel, Elena gave birth to a daughter, Sophie. Motherhood was a joy, but poverty was a relentless shadow. She moved from one precarious job to another: house cleaner, retail clerk, daycare assistant. The art supplies gathered dust. When Sophie was 3, a bad flu and a stack of unpaid medical bills pushed Elena to the brink. She packed their few belongings into a weathered sedan and drove north to San Francisco, a city of millions where she could be anonymous, where she could find work that paid enough to keep a roof over her daughter's head. She answered a classified ad for a dishwasher at a new high-end restaurant. The interview was with a harried kitchen manager. He didn't look at her face, only at her capable hands. She got the job. The restaurant was called Reed & Co. For 5 years, their orbits aligned with cruel precision. Daniel would stride through the kitchen, tasting sauces, barking orders, a whirlwind of focused energy. Elena kept her head down, her arms submerged in steaming, soapy water, hidden behind the stainless steel barrier of the dish pit. She saw him on the local news once, accepting an award. The The confident tilt of his head, the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, it was him, and yet it wasn't the boy she knew. She never said a word. What would be the point? He was a universe away. She was the invisible engine that cleaned his universe's plates. Her life was a tightrope of routine. Wake at 4 a.m., pack Sophie's lunch, drop her at school, start the prep shift by 5:30, work the lunch rush, a few hours break, then back for the dinner service until midnight. Her world was the scent of bleach and the clatter of porcelain. Her pride was that her station was always impeccable, her tickets always on time. She was a ghost in his machine, and he was the distant, unknowing god of her daily struggle. She thought the past was a locked room. She had no idea the key was dangling in plain sight, in the form of a habit Daniel had maintained since his own dishwashing days. Every Friday night, after the last ticket was served and the line cooks had left, Daniel Reed performed a personal ritual. He would pour himself a glass of bourbon, walk to the dish pit, and thank the closing dishwasher personally. It was a superstition, a nod to his roots. He believed it kept him humble. He would offer a brief, genuine thank you for your hard work, make eye contact, and leave a $100 cash tip on the stainless steel counter. On a cold Friday in November, the regular closer called in sick. Elena, needing the extra money, volunteered to stay. The dining room was empty. The kitchen lights were dimmed. She was sorting silverware when she heard his footsteps on the tile floor. She kept her back turned, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on a pot. Daniel walked up to the station, placed his glass down, and prepared his usual speech. "Tough service tonight. I appreciate you staying late." Elena froze. Her blood turned to ice. That voice, deeper now, but with the same unique cadence she heard in her dreams. She couldn't move. "Look, I know it's not glamorous work," he continued, leaning against the counter, "but this place doesn't run without you." Slowly, compelled by a force older than fear, Elena turned around. For the first time in 20 years, their eyes met. Daniel's smile was polite, professional. His eyes scanned her face, the lines of stress, the hair tied back severely, the tired eyes. There was no spark of recognition, only the bland gratitude of a boss to an employee. He slid the $100 bill across the counter. "Get home safe," he said, picked up his glass and walked back toward his office. Elena stood, her hands dripping soapy water onto the floor, watching the man she once loved, the father of her child, walk away without knowing her. The truth was a physical weight in her chest, but the story was far more complex than a simple case of forgotten love. Because Daniel Reed wasn't the only one living a double life. Elena Flores had a secret, but it wasn't just that she was Daniel Reed's lost love. In the quiet apartment she shared with her daughter, hidden in a plain notebook beneath her bed, was a detailed record, not of recipes or dreams, but of observations. For 5 years, she had documented the rhythms of Daniel's restaurant, the names of his regular suppliers, the exact timing of his Friday night ritual. She noted when he was stressed, when he was celebrating, when he left with a certain elegant blonde woman who was often photographed in the society pages. To an outsider, it might have looked like the notes of a corporate spy. For Elena, it was a map of a fortress she could never breach, and a chronicle of the man who had built it. She wasn't planning anything. She was simply bearing witness to the life that should have been hers. Her daughter, Sophie, knew none of this. To Sophie, her mother was a hard-working, quietly sad woman who had never spoken about her father. "He died before you were born," was the only story Elena ever offered, her voice leaving no room for questions. Sophie, now a bright 19-year-old studying graphic design at a community college, had accepted this. She saw her mother's exhaustion, felt the constant anxiety about money, and vowed to build a better life for them both. She worked part-time at a copy shop, unaware that the famous chef she sometimes saw on city magazine covers was the reason for the haunted look in her mother's eyes. The Friday night after the non-recognition at the dish pit, Elena cracked. Sitting at her small kitchen table, the $100 bill crisp and alien beside her, she opened the notebook to a fresh page. Her hand shook as she wrote the date. Then she did something she had never allowed herself to do. She wrote a letter, not one she would send, but one she needed to voice. "You looked right at me," she wrote. "You thanked me for my hard work. You have no idea that my hardest work has been surviving the life you left me with. Our daughter is brilliant. She looks like you when you're thinking deeply. She has your stubborn chin. She has never known a single day of your wealth, your security, or your love." Tears blotted the ink. She closed the book, feeling a strange mixture of relief and profound grief. The dam had broken, and the controlled ghost she had become was starting to dissolve. Meanwhile, Daniel Reed was facing a crisis of a different kind. A flagship location of Reed & Co. in Los Angeles was bleeding money. A scathing review from a powerful food blogger had gone viral, accusing the restaurant of being stale and resting on its laurels. His investors were nervous. The elegant blonde from the society pages, a venture capitalist named Victoria Thorne, was applying pressure of her own. She saw Daniel's brand as a good investment, but only if he could expand aggressively. Over dinner at his own chef's counter, she laid out her ultimatum. Daniel, darling, the sentimentality is charming, but it's not a business model. That Friday night tip thing, it's a waste of capital. The dishwashers are a cost center. We need to streamline, automate, and push into 3 new markets in the next 18 months, or my fund pulls its support. Daniel pushed his food around his plate, the seared scallops tasting like ash. He looked through the kitchen pass, his eyes unconsciously drifting to the dish pit, now empty and dark. He thought of the woman from last Friday, the intense, weary look in her eyes that had lingered in his mind for some reason he couldn't place. They're not a cost center, he said quietly, more to himself than to Victoria. They're the foundation. The next week, a pipe burst in the ceiling above the dish pit during the lunch prep. It was chaos, water everywhere, a mad scramble to save equipment. Elena, along with the other dish staff, worked furiously to move racks and contain the flood. In the frantic motion, her apron snagged on a valve, tearing the pocket. From it fell her small, personal notebook. It splashed into an inch of water on the floor. Before she could grab it, Mateo, the sous chef, swooped in to move a heavy crate and stepped on it, kicking it aside. It slid across the wet floor, coming to rest near the doorway just as Daniel walked in to survey the damage. He bent down, picking up the soggy, streaked notebook. Someone lost this, he announced, holding it up. Elena's heart stopped. She stood frozen, a stack of wet plates in her hands. Daniel, assuming it belonged to one of the line cooks, they were always jotting down ideas, absent-mindedly flipped it open to a random page to check for a name. His eyes scanned the handwritten lines. They were not notes about knife cuts or fermentation times. January 12th, the entry read. D met with the sommelier for an hour, discussed French imports, seemed agitated. The blonde woman called 3 times. He took the calls in his office, voice low. Daniel's brow furrowed. He turned a few more pages. March 3rd, the fish delivery was late. D yelled at the purveyor but didn't cancel the contract. He still uses them. Sentiment. April 19th, Friday tip ritual. He used a different bourbon tonight. His left hand was shaking. Stress. Daniel's blood ran cold. This was surveillance. Detailed, intimate, and eerily accurate. His eyes flicked up from the page, sweeping across the faces of his stunned staff who were all watching him. His gaze landed on Elena, her expression one of pure, unvarnished terror. In that moment, he didn't see a dishwasher. He saw a spy. His voice was dangerously calm. My office, now. The walk to his office was the longest of Elena's life. The painting of Carmel Cove hung on the wall behind his desk, a cruel irony she couldn't appreciate. Daniel dropped the wet notebook onto his polished oak desk. Explain this, he demanded, no longer the grateful boss, but the hardened CEO. Elena said nothing. She couldn't. Her voice was gone. Who are you working for? Daniel pressed, leaning forward. Is it a competitor? Is it Victoria trying to force my hand? Tell me and maybe I don't call the police. The word police broke her paralysis. No, she whispered, the sound ragged. It's not what you think. Then what is it? He roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The force of it shook the painting on the wall. Elena flinched and her eyes darted to it. Daniel followed her gaze. He saw her looking at the painting of the cove, and for a fleeting second he saw not a dishwasher, but a ghost from a lifetime ago, the shape of her eyes. The way she held her mouth, a memory, fuzzy and distant, of a girl on a rocky beach talking about the light on the water. It was impossible. He shook his head, dismissing the hallucination. Stress was making him see things. I'm waiting, he said, his voice lower. Elena took a shuddering breath. The game was over. My name is Elena Flores, she said, forcing each word out. We met in Carmel 20 years ago. You worked at the Wharfside Grill. I was an art student. You loved my basil chiffonade. Daniel's face went blank. Then slowly it began to reconstruct itself, not with recognition, but with dawning, horrific comprehension. The name, the place, the details no spy could possibly know. He looked from her aged, worn face to the vibrant, youthful painting on his wall. The cove was identical. The connection was a live wire shocking his system. He stumbled back a step, hitting his bookshelf. Elena, the name was a foreign object in his mouth. But you disappeared. I tried, the letters came back. You never tried hard enough, she said, a lifetime of bitterness giving her strength. I was here, I've been here. For 5 years, Daniel, washing the plates you ate your success from. The revelation was a physical blow. The room spun. The woman he'd ignored, the employee he'd patronized with his $100 tips, was the girl he'd pledged his future to. The guilt was instantaneous and monstrous, but his business mind, trained for threat assessment, immediately seized on the next logical, terrifying question. Why the notes? Why watch me like that if you just wanted me to know you? Elena closed her eyes. This was the deeper secret, the one that would change everything. I wasn't just watching you, she said, her voice trembling. I was documenting you for her. Daniel stared, uncomprehending. For who? At that exact moment, the office door swung open. Sophie, worried after her mother had texted her about a work emergency, had come to the restaurant. The hostess, recognizing her from when she'd dropped off a forgotten lunch for Elena, had pointed her to the office. Sophie stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, taking in the scene, her mother distraught and Daniel Reed, pale as a ghost, staring at her as if he'd seen one. Daniel's eyes moved from Elena to the young woman in the doorway. He saw the light brown hair, the shape of the face, the intelligent, questioning eyes. And then he saw it, the stubborn set of the chin, his chin. The truth didn't dawn, it exploded. The notebook, the hidden life, the 20-year gap, it all collapsed into one horrifying, glorious point. The foundation of his world didn't crack. It vanished entirely. And the woman who had engineered this revelation, Victoria Thorne, was about to make her next move, unaware that the game had just been played on a board she couldn't even see. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the hallway. Daniel Reed stared at the young woman in the doorway, then back at Elena, then at the painting of the cove. The 3 points of his past, present, and future collapsed into a single, shattering moment of clarity. Who is this? He managed to ask, though he already knew. Elena, tears streaming down her face, looked at her daughter. Sophie, she whispered, this is your father. Sophie's hands flew to her mouth. She took a step back, her eyes wide with shock, then hurt, then a dawning, furious understanding. She looked at her mother, the woman who had worked herself to the bone, who had hidden in plain sight for years. Then she looked at Daniel, the celebrated chef in his pristine chef's jacket, standing in an office that probably cost more than their entire life. You, she said, the word sharp as a knife. You're the reason. Daniel felt the accusation like a physical blow. He tried to speak, to explain, but no sound came out. The corporate negotiator, the master of the high-stakes deal, was utterly disarmed. He took a step towards Sophie, his hand outstretched. She flinched. The small movement was more devastating than any screamed insult. He let his hand fall. I didn't know, he said, the words hollow even to his own ears. Elena, why didn't you tell me? I would have done anything. Elena's composure snapped. Would you? She fired back, her voice trembling with 2 decades of pent-up anguish. You had a new life, Daniel, a famous, important life. What was I supposed to do? Show up with a baby and beg? You didn't look for me, not really. I became a story you told yourself about your humble beginnings, a painting on a wall. I refused to be your charity case. Daniel reeled. He wanted to argue, to list the ways he had tried, but the evidence was standing before him, a proud, struggling woman and a daughter who saw him as a monster. He had failed, utterly and completely. The next 48 hours were a chaotic blur. Daniel, operating on pure, desperate instinct, did 2 things. First, he called his assistant and cleared his calendar indefinitely, citing a family emergency. The restaurant world buzzed with speculation. Second, he begged, not ordered, Elena and Sophie to come to his home. Not to his sleek penthouse, but to a smaller, quieter house he owned in Presidio Heights, a place filled with books and light that he'd never found time to live in. It was an olive branch, a space neutral from the kitchen's hierarchy. Reluctantly, shell-shocked, they agreed. They sat in his sun-drenched living room, a chasm of 20 years between them on a plush sofa. Daniel made tea, his hands shaking. He answered every question Sophie hurled at him with brutal, unvarnished honesty. Yes, he had loved her mother. Yes, he had promised to return. Yes, he had gotten caught up in his ambition and failed. No, there was no excuse. He showed them old photos of himself in Carmel, a skinny kid with a friar burn on his arm. He was trying to prove he was once the person Elena had loved. It was a start, fragile and painful. The business world does not stop for personal revelations. Victoria Thorne was not a patient woman. When Daniel failed to show up for a critical investor call about the Los Angeles expansion, she smelled blood in the water. She had her own sources in the restaurant. The story of the flooded dish pit, the screaming match in the office, the mysterious woman and girl leaving with Daniel. It was juicy kitchen gossip. Victoria, connecting dots with ruthless efficiency, hired a private investigator. Within 24 hours, she had a dossier. Elena Flores, longtime dishwasher, single mother, daughter Sophie, age 19, and a background check that revealed a prior address in Carmel by the Sea, concurrent with Daniel's time there. Victoria didn't need the full romantic story. She saw a vulnerability. A secret family was a liability. An emotional chef was an unstable one. She saw her opportunity to seize full control. 3 days after the office confrontation, Daniel received a formal notice from the board of Reed & Co. demanding an emergency meeting. The agenda, a vote of no confidence in his leadership, citing his recent, unpredictable behavior and neglect of corporate duties. The motion was backed by Victoria's investment group, which held 35% of the voting shares. Daniel was cornered. He could fight, but it would be a brutal, public battle that would drain his focus and resources he now desperately wanted to redirect to his family. He sat in his home study, the legal documents spread before him, and for the first time, he considered walking away. The empire he'd built felt like a gilded cage. Meanwhile, Sophie was conducting her own investigation. She avoided Daniel, spending hours online, digging into every article, every interview he'd ever given. She was looking for the villain she expected. Instead, she found a narrative of relentless work, of a man who talked about the dish pit with reverence, who funded culinary scholarships for underprivileged kids. She found the charity work he never publicized. It didn't erase his failure, but it complicated her anger. One evening, she confronted her mother in the guest room. "Why did you really never tell him?" she asked, not with accusation, but with a need to understand. Elena, looking out the window at the manicured garden, gave the real answer she'd never voiced. Pride, major, and fear that he would reject you, that he would look at us and see a mistake. I thought our quiet, difficult life was better than the humiliation of being a pity project for a rich man. Sophie hugged her mother, finally understanding the weight she had carried. The board meeting was set for Friday at 10 a.m. On Thursday night, Daniel made a decision. He found Elena in the kitchen, washing a single cup by hand, a habit she couldn't break. "I'm going to step down," he said quietly. "The fight isn't worth it. The money, it doesn't matter. I want to try and fix what I broke, with you, with Sophie." Elena turned off the tap. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since Carmel. She saw the gray in his hair, the deep lines of stress, but also the earnest, lost boy she'd fallen for. "Don't," she said, her voice firm. "Don't let them take it from you, not for us. This restaurant, it's your language. It's how you speak to the world. You can't translate your apology by destroying your life's work." Daniel was stunned. After everything, she was offering him grace. It was a gift he felt utterly unworthy of. But Victoria Thorne was not done. On Friday morning, as Daniel prepared to leave for the board meeting, his personal lawyer called, his voice tense. "Daniel, we have a problem. A major food blogger just published a piece. It's not a review, it's an expose. It names Elena Flores. It claims you've been exploiting an old girlfriend, keeping her in poverty as a dishwasher while you live in luxury. It strongly implies Sophie is your love child and you've abandoned her. The narrative is toxic. The board is seeing it right now." Victoria had played her trump card, twisting the truth into a weapon. She had leaked a salacious, damaging version of the story to the press, aiming to destroy Daniel's reputation and force him out. The personal was now irreversibly public. Daniel's hand tightened on his phone. He looked at Elena and Sophie, who were watching him with worried eyes. They had become collateral damage in his corporate war. The board meeting was no longer about expansion plans. It was a trial, and Daniel realized he couldn't win it by playing defense. He had to rewrite the narrative entirely, but to do that, he would have to risk the very thing he'd just found. Daniel Reed did not go to the boardroom alone. He walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 48th floor with Elena on one side and Sophie on the other. The board members, and Victoria Thorne at the head of the table, fell silent. The air was thick with judgment and the fresh scent of scandal from the morning's article. Daniel did not take his usual seat. He remained standing. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm and clear, "I'd like to introduce you to the two most important people in my life. This is Elena Flores, and this is my daughter, Sophie." A murmur rippled through the room. Victoria's lips tightened into a thin, victorious smile. She had forced his hand, and he was playing right into her narrative of emotional instability. But Daniel continued, "The story you read this morning is a lie. It is a malicious distortion of a truth I have only just begun to understand myself. 20 years ago, I made a promise to Alina. I broke that promise. In my pursuit of this," he said, gesturing to the room, the view, the symbol of his success, "I failed them. Completely. She did not keep our daughter from me out of malice. She kept her safe from my neglect. For the past 5 years, Alina has worked in our restaurant, not as a spy, not as a stalker, but as one of the most dedicated, essential members of our team, and I, blinded by my own ambition, never saw her." He turned to face Alina, his composure wavering. "I am not here to defend my leadership. I am here to correct a historical failure. Effective immediately, I am transferring 20% of my personal equity in Reed & Co. to a trust for Sophie. Furthermore, I am creating a new executive position, Director of Restaurant Foundations. Its first holder will be Alina Flores." The room erupted. Victoria shot to her feet. "This is insanity. You're handing over equity and inventing titles because of personal guilt. This proves you're unfit to lead." Daniel turned his gaze to her, and for the first time, there was no anger in it, only pity. "No, Victoria, it proves I've finally learned what the foundation of a business truly is. It isn't expansion plans or investor returns. It's the people who show up every day, who make the machine run, who have stories we're too busy to hear. Alina knows this restaurant's rhythms better than anyone in this room. She has seen it from the only angle that matters, the ground up." He then looked at the board. "You have my proposal. A vote of no confidence is your right, but if you vote to remove me, you're not just removing a chef, you're removing the soul of this company. And I will take that soul and my family, and we will start again." He then did something no one expected. He nodded to Sophie. She stood, a little nervously, and placed a slim laptop on the conference table. "My daughter is a gifted designer," Daniel said. "She has also, in the past 72 hours, helped me draft a new proposal, not for a restaurant in Los Angeles, but for the Foundation Kitchen, a non-profit culinary training school integrated into our flagship location. It will be funded by my personal shares, and it will offer paid apprenticeships to single parents, to people seeking a second chance. Alina will help run it. This isn't charity. It's an investment in the very pipeline this industry is starving for." Sophie opened the laptop, revealing stunning, professional mock-ups of the program's branding, website, and curriculum. The board members leaned in, their expressions shifting from outrage to intrigue. Victoria was outmaneuvered. Daniel had taken her weapon, the personal story, and transformed it into a visionary mission statement. The vote was called. It was not a vote of no confidence. It was a vote on Daniel's new initiative. It passed, with only Victoria's faction dissenting. She gathered her papers and left without a word. Her hostile takeover evaporated. In a single move, Daniel had secured his company, publicly atoned for his failure, and given his family a future not of handouts, but of shared purpose. The months that followed were a gradual, often awkward reconstruction. Daniel and Alina did not rush into a romantic reunion. They started simply as co-workers and co-parents. They attended Sophie's art shows together. They had painfully honest dinners. Daniel learned the weight of a water bill, the anxiety of a shaky transmission in an old car, the realities Alina had lived with for 2 decades. He listened. He apologized, not just in words, but in actions. He sold his penthouse and moved into the Presidio Heights house permanently, making room for Alina and Sophie to stay as long as they wished. One Saturday morning, he found Alina in the kitchen, not washing dishes but sketching at the table. It was a design for a mural for the Foundation Kitchen's dining hall. He watched her, the focused line of her brow, the familiar, beautiful intensity he remembered. "You never stopped being an artist," he said softly. She looked up, a sad smile on her face. "I just channeled it into survival." He pulled a small, wrapped package from behind his back. It was a set of professional-grade watercolors and brushes. "The world needs your art, Alina, not just on the walls of my restaurant, but everywhere." It was the first gift he had given her that wasn't an attempt to fix the past, but to nurture her future. She cried, and for the first time, they were tears of hope, not of grief. A year later, on the anniversary of their meeting in Carmel, Daniel took Alina and Sophie back to Point Lobos. The fog was rolling in just as it had then. He got down on one knee, not with a ring, but with a simple folded piece of paper. "Elena Flores," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't promise you the past, but I can promise you every day of the future. As a partner, as a co-parent, as the man who should have never stopped looking for you. Will you build that with me?" Elena nodded, unable to speak, and pulled him to his feet. Sophie, smiling through her own tears, took a picture of them embracing against the grey ocean. It was not an ending, but a true beginning. The final surprise came not from Daniel, but from Sophie. For her final college project, she created a graphic novel. It was not about a lost love, but about a hidden foundation. It told the story of a dishwasher, her unseen labor, and the invisible architecture of a restaurant. She dedicated it to her mother, and in the acknowledgements she wrote, "To my father, for finally seeing the masterpiece that was right in front of him." Daniel framed that page and hung it in his office, right beside the painting of the cove. The two artworks now spoke to each other across the years, a complete story at last. Reed & Co. thrived. The Foundation Kitchen became its crown jewel, praised as a model of ethical business. Daniel still performed his Friday night ritual, but now he often found Elena there, not washing dishes, but consulting with the new dish crew, offering the quiet wisdom she had earned. They would walk out together, hand in hand, into the San Francisco night, the millionaire and the dishwasher, the chef and the artist. The man who had everything and the woman who showed him what everything was really worth. Their story proves that sometimes the greatest love isn't the one you search the world for. It's the one that waits patiently for you to come home. The story of Daniel and Elena is more than a tale of lost love found. It is a blueprint for how we build our lives and what we choose to see in the foundations. For 20 years, Daniel operated under a single driving principle: that success was a fortress to be constructed high above everything else. He believed the view from the top was the only one that mattered. He was wrong. The most important view is from the ground up. It is from the dish pit, from the quiet corner, from the perspective of those we rely on but seldom see. His greatest failure was not breaking a promise to a young woman in Carmel. It was the 5 years he spent walking past a miracle in his own kitchen, blinded by his own reflection in the polished stainless steel. We all have our dish pits, the routines, the people, the humble corners of our world that we take for granted because they are always there, functioning silently. We chase distant horizons, convinced our purpose lies in the next achievement, the next acquisition, the next summit. But what if the purpose was in the foundation all along? What if the love, the meaning, the connection we seek is not ahead of us, but beneath our feet, waiting for us to stop and recognize it? Daniel's redemption did not begin when he discovered the truth. It began the moment he chose to kneel, to get on eye level with a truth that shattered his world, and to rebuild from the pieces with humility. Elena's story is not one of passive waiting. It is a testament to dignified endurance. She built a life of substance in the shadows, raising a remarkable daughter, maintaining her integrity when she had every reason to succumb to bitterness. Her strength was in her silence, but her victory was in finally allowing her truth to be heard. She didn't need to be saved by a millionaire. She needed to be seen by the man she once loved. And in that seeing, they saved each other. Their journey forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. Who is the Elena in your life? Who is the person you walk past every day, whose story you don't know, whose value you've calculated on a spreadsheet but never felt in your heart? It might be a coworker, a family member, an old friend, or even a part of yourself that you've buried under ambition or regret. The universe rarely sends us lightning bolts of obvious revelation. It sends us quiet, persistent whispers. A familiar look in a stranger's eye, a repeated memory, a feeling that won't fade. The miracle is in the noticing. Daniel Reed learned that love isn't something you find at the end of a quest. It's something you honor in the daily grind. It's in the respect for the work, in the gratitude for the hands that make your world possible, and in the courage to face the past not with guilt, but with a commitment to build a better future. He traded an empire of glass and steel for a foundation of flesh and blood, and in doing so, he gained everything. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a second chance you've been given or one you hope to find, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the right story at the right time can change a life. We have many more stories like this one, tales of hidden connections and unexpected redemption. To make sure you don't miss them, subscribe and tap the bell. Until next time, look down. Your foundation is waiting.